And so, welcome everybody. As Michael said, my name is Danny. I think I know most everybody here, and the person that I didn't know, talked to a little bit before. And so Soryu is not here this week. He's actually currently in California at Wisdom 2.0, meeting with different people over there and really trying to make contacts to expand CML and move us in kind of the future direction of where we're going to go, which there's a lot of possibilities still floating in the air, but it's nice to make connection with different people out there who have similar intentions of really bringing together awakening and responsibility. But I'm very excited to lead the program tonight, and glad to see everyone. And what I want to talk about is really something that's very close to my own personal practice. As many of you know, we use Shinzen's basic mindfulness system, which is a system that has many techniques, working with our sensory experience, different ways that we can work with things that we see, things that we hear, and things that we feel, both in the internal subjective experience and then also in the external objective experience. And for whatever reason that I don't, particularly know, my practice has really over the last couple of years been really focused around feeling the body. And kind of stemming from an interest in yoga that I started practicing many years ago, and body-oriented practices, meditation in general. A lot of times people talk about the breath, and breath meditation is something that's very popular. But over the last couple of years, really using not only breath, but really tuning into the sensations of the body in general, and really seeing how that has not only transformed my idea about mindfulness practice, but it's also informed the way that I feel like I really just show up in the world. And very often people talk about this idea called presence or embodiment. What it really means to be present in your body. And especially in the modern age, over the last, maybe not that long, but definitely over the last 50 years or so, there's been sort of a trend of not being as embodied, and kind of being in our minds, being in our heads a lot, being often very distracted by media and ideas and concepts. And this kind of the original way that people used to live, on the land, having to be very intimate with their body and with nature and with their surroundings. Kind of modern people have lost the emphasis on what it really means to be present and to be in your body. And to talk a little bit about mindfulness and what mindfulness really means, there's a lot of definitions of mindfulness. There's a lot of different ways that people talk about mindfulness. But mindfulness is a translation of the word sati, which in a very literal sense means to remember. Now, the practice of mindfulness includes more than just remembering. But when we talk about mindfulness of the body, we can consider that as simply the act of remembering to pay attention to your body. And that with that simple practice of just remembering on a regular basis, like, hey, I have one of these things, and how does it work? How do I interact with it? How do I live my life from a perspective that's actually from your body, and not living our lives from a perspective that is just thinking about concepts, and a perspective that's coming mostly from our minds. And really the reason why we have such a hard time being embodied and being present in that way is simply that we don't practice doing that. We don't take the time to remember, hey, I have a body. What does my body feel like right now? If we, kind of just reflect on our default mode as we go about our day, and different people to different extent, depending on what kind of work you do, might tend to think that most of the time they're thinking about things. Like that's the things that they're remembering. They're remembering what they did, they're remembering what they need to do, and very often the sense of what we hear and what we see in our minds is the thing that we're remembering most often. But what would it be like to remember to feel your body? And for that to be the default mode, the baseline of the way that you live your life. And the very interesting thing that I've found is that there's actually a wisdom present in the body. Often we think that we need to understand things, or that wisdom and knowledge comes from our intellect and it comes from concepts. But in reality, our bodies are incredibly complicated, these functioning things. And it knows how to do all of that, whether we understand it or not. Before science did all of this research on, the anatomy and how our respiratory system works and how the brain works, and we've learned all of these things about, from a technical, intellectual perspective, how our body works. Our bodies already knew how to do all of that stuff. It didn't need that information. And often we can forget that. We can forget how, kind of miraculous our bodies are, and all of the wisdom and all of the things that our body knows how to do without our intellectual knowledge. So maybe one example of this, just to make this a little bit more tangible for us right now, I want to ask everyone to do a very simple exercise and just move your hand. And so pay attention to what it feels like to move your hand. And then let me ask you a question. How did you do that? And is it possible to answer that question in any way that doesn't involve some kind of scientific theory that you learned in school? And so we're left with this very interesting question. Somehow we're able to move our bodies. It seems like we have some kind of conscious control over that. But yet, if we really question and we really ask ourselves, how does that actually happen? How does our body move? How do we breathe? And we're kind of left with, I don't know. But the interesting thing to notice is that we don't need to know. It happens nonetheless. And it's giving up the need to actually have an answer to that question, to actually be able to say something in words that someone else would be able to understand, but actually admit that, we don't know how our bodies work, but yet there's a wisdom that we in fact have access to and that we use all the time. It's how we go about our lives, but we often are not paying attention to that kind of wisdom. We're not remembering that wisdom is always present in our bodies. And so what we're going to be exploring today are some different techniques to really remember that we have bodies and bring our attention into our bodies. Another thing that we might not recognize is, we have the body that we can see on the outside and the body that we can see of other people. But there's this whole world of space inside of our bodies that we actually can pay attention to, and very interesting things are happening in that space. And for me, the kind of big, from a very technical perspective, that tends to be my personality and tends to be the way that I like to think about these practices. The thing that really allows us to do that is recognizing that it's possible to put our awareness in a spatial location, somewhere in space. And so we can do, again, another simple exercise of just paying attention to the front of the room. So you're looking towards me. So just notice that you're paying attention in front of you right now. Now let me ask you, without turning your heads or without moving, pay attention behind you. And so are you able to just notice that you're able to put your attention behind you? And that's different from putting your attention in front of you. You can feel that difference. That our attention can actually be moved in space, and that we have that control, again, somehow in a way that's very difficult to understand. And so another example right now, just pay attention to your feet. And so just notice that if I ask you to do that, you're able to put your attention on your feet, and then maybe sensations that are happening in your feet that were happening before I asked you that question suddenly become available, suddenly become apparent to you. And so as we learn that we can actually place our attention in certain locations in space, we'll often notice that when we're caught up in our minds, when we're caught up in the world of thinking and the world of concepts, our attention spatially tends to be somewhere around our heads. And that's something that you can notice when you're really thinking about something. If you notice, where is my attention right now? Spatially, it will be somewhere around your head, maybe inside your head, maybe even somewhere at a distance from you. If you're thinking about a location, it almost seems sometimes like your awareness can actually be there, like present in that location. Your body or where you are and the space around you is just completely not available to you at that time. So in the same way, in remembering to be in our bodies, we can pay attention to, is our attention lower in our bodies at any given time? And we're going to be playing around with how we actually do that in the practice today, of actually taking our awareness and placing it inside the body, and in particular at a low position in our body. And when we do that over time, we develop a sense of really being grounded, a sense of being present in our body, and then actually we can be aware of what's happening around us without having to think so much, and to have the constant stream of thoughts accompany that. And one thing you might notice with that as well is bringing our attention lower in our bodies. If we're used to constantly being in our heads, there's actually a resistance to doing that. It almost feels like you're trying to drag something down into your body. And if you're not concentrated and if you're not paying attention, it's just going to pop right back up. That momentum, that habit pattern that we've developed for who knows how long, is a tangible thing that we can feel, and that our awareness just naturally wants to go to the place where it feels most natural. And what is most natural? It's just the thing that we've practiced the most, that we've allowed ourselves to enforce that pattern again and again. So in the practice of bodyfulness, or mindfulness of the body, the key thing to pay attention to is, are we able to place our attention at a location in our bodies that's not our heads? And as we're able to remember to do that on a regular basis, then the wisdom that's present in the body starts to become more apparent, because we start to notice all these things that we're feeling that we don't need to have conscious thought about, yet we're still aware, and that information still informs us. Sometimes informs us in a much bigger way than usually our thoughts about things do. Our emotions, the kind of gut feelings that we have, the feelings around our heart, all of these things are part of our nervous system and actually contain a lot of intelligence and information that informs a lot of our decisions that we're not usually aware of. And so this practice helps us to tap into that innate wisdom that is present in our bodies. And so let's explore this practice a little bit, and then we'll have plenty of time for question and answer. And I'm interested in your questions and what interests you about putting your attention in your body, and what things typically come up for you when you do that. And then as a community, we can explore where to take it from there. So the very first thing, especially in this practice, but is true of any practice of mindfulness, is our posture is very important. And in particular, sitting up with a straight spine. You can have your feet firmly grounded on the floor. And so one thing that I like to look at, especially coming from a background of anatomy and alignment from a yoga practice, is you want to make sure that your feet are parallel to each other. If your feet are kind of rotated either in or out, it's going to subtly put your hips at an imbalance. So if your feet are parallel, that makes your hips a little bit more stable. You want to be able to feel your feet on the ground. And you want to be able to feel yourself pushing into the chair. And then from that place, allow your spine to grow tall. You want to feel that length coming from this point at the back of your head, where the spine connects into the skull. That's the line that we really want to reach up from and find this place of balance. And from there, if you'd like, you can close your eyes or let your eyes be open in the space in front of you. And so take this time to allow your awareness to descend into your body. And so just notice where your awareness is in space right now. If it tends to be somewhere around the head. See if you can slowly scan down your body from your head all the way down to your toes. And to the best of your ability, allow your awareness to fill your body. And pay attention to the sensations of the body, and in particular, pay attention to the sensations inside the body. That in fact, there is a space inside the body. We might have all kinds of visual representations of what we think the space inside the body looks like. And so notice if any of those images are present for you. And see if you can set that aside and pay attention to the direct experience of what the space inside the body feels like. And typically this space can kind of feel empty, can feel hollow, as almost as if there's nothing inside the body. And so in order to practice bringing our attention to different parts in the body, and actually getting a sense of how is it that we bring our attention and feel the body in different locations. I'm going to simply mention different parts of the body. And when I mention that part, just allow your awareness to jump to that point. And just notice what you feel in that space, and then move on to the next point. And I'm going to move rather quickly. So you don't have very much time to second guess yourself, to wonder if what you're feeling is the right thing or the wrong thing. We're simply just going to move our awareness through the body and feel what we feel. An important thing to pay attention to is the fact that your awareness is moving through the body and that you have control over that movement. And so bring your attention to the top of your head, to the inside of the center of your skull, to the center of your throat, to the right shoulder, the right elbow, the right wrist, the right hand, the right wrist, the right elbow, the right shoulder, the center of the throat, the left shoulder, the left elbow, the left wrist, the left hand, the left wrist, the left elbow, the left shoulder, the center of the throat, the center of the chest, the right side of the chest, the center of the chest, the left side of the chest, the navel center, the tip of your tailbone, the right hip, the right knee, the right ankle, the right foot, the right ankle, the right knee, the right hip, the tip of your tailbone, the left hip, the left knee, the left ankle, the left foot, the left ankle, the left knee, the left hip, the tip of your tailbone, the navel center, the center of your chest, the center of your throat, the whole head, the whole right arm, the whole left arm, both arms together, the whole front of the torso, the back of the torso, the whole torso and the space inside, the whole right leg, the whole left leg, both legs together, your whole body together. Feel your whole body. We can place our awareness at specific locations in the body. And then we can also zoom our awareness out to cover the entire body. Allow yourself to feel your whole body. And as you feel your body, maybe you noticed that you were breathing before. Maybe you just noticed now. And pay attention to as the breath comes in and out. And there's a movement you can feel within the space of the body. You don't need to know how that movement happens. And we're going to start to take very gentle, conscious control of our breath. Just to emphasize this point of wanting to keep our attention low in our bodies. Noticing that as we get caught up in thoughts, in mental talk or images, that our attention rises up into the head. And so we can use our breath to bring the attention into the lower belly. And so bring your attention to a point in the body that's a couple inches below your belly button. And that is back inside the body. You can bring your attention into the center of the body a couple inches below the belly button. And as you pay attention to your breath, allow yourself to extend the exhale. Bring a little bit of effort, a little bit of intention. To exhale as completely as you can, without causing any tension or holding the breath in any way. But you're going to exhale into that point. It's a couple inches below the belly button in the center of the body, letting all of the air go. And then allow the inhale to happen naturally. And notice if there's a rising of your awareness as you inhale that comes back up towards the head. And if that happens, and simply exhale, bring a little bit of effort and intention to that exhale. And exhale into that point in the lower belly. And as you inhale, see if you can keep your attention at that point. Just allowing the inhale to happen. Pay attention to what you're feeling at that point. And if the attention rises, then with the next exhale, simply exhale back down into the lower belly. And if you find that you're getting a little bit sleepy, that there's a lack of energy, allow yourself to use a little bit more effort in this exhale. Allow the effort of your exhale to energize the body, to wake up your awareness. And if you find that you're present and awake, then allow this exhale to be deeply relaxing and soothing. Finding a way to exhale completely that's without resistance. It seems like a natural flow in our bodies. And so as you slowly open your back into the room, you transition into a little bit of a discussion to see what that was like, and any questions that may have come up. And as we have this conversation, see if you can notice where your attention is abiding. Is it possible to be in conversation, to listen to conversation, and have your attention still be low in the body and connect to that sense of being grounded? And you can use your breath to help do that. And then simply noticing if the attention rises up into the head. And so this is something that we can maintain both in formal practice and also in daily life. So if anybody has any reports they'd like to share or any questions.
I found it really easy to do, to navigate around.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, in everyday life, there's absolutely no reason to do it. So you don't. So I was surprised at how easy it was for myself. It just, you know, went to all those places and then, you know, it stayed down there. And that felt, when I came out of it, it felt like I really did come from down there. You know, like kind of just, you know, brought my consciousness back to the room.
Mm-hmm.
It really felt like I really did. I really was down there. Mm. It was interesting, very interesting.
Yeah. And is that something that you've experienced before, of noticing your attention being at different places in your body?
I think intuitively, you know, I've been around long enough so that if I'm digging for an answer or something like that, there's somebody that's, you know, if I'm digging for something, I'll intuitively go there a little bit. Mm. But I don't like go down and stay there. You know, I don't go down and stay there and hang out. Mm-hmm. Just, you know, kind of just go down a little bit and for intuition, mm-hmm. that kind of thing. So, mm-hmm. yeah, I'm sure intuition resides in that area for sure. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And did you find that by staying down there, that had some kind of impact on the mental chatter or kind of mental activity that?
It was very quiet, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it was very quiet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Couldn't think of it.
Yeah. Great. Yes, this is an excellent example, and this is not something that really is all that difficult. It's actually a very natural ability that we all have, and it's almost a surprise that we're never taught how to do this. You know, it's actually a very simple skill. And to, you know, train and develop that skill, you know, makes it a lot more tangible to do this practice in a very, you know, technical way. I feel like sometimes, you know, we talk a lot about trying to be present in your body and quiet your thoughts and quiet your mind, and a lot of people often have a lot of challenge doing that and don't really understand the mechanics of how that works. But there actually is sort of a mechanical quality to our awareness, and that when our awareness is in our heads, our thoughts tend to be active, and if our awareness is elsewhere in the body, then there's other forms of wisdom and intelligence that we can access, like intuition. And so that's very well seen.
I was kind of surprised too that, because sometimes when I do body scans, I'll find myself drift off, even if I'm doing a guided one, and I'll be like, oh wow, I missed that whole section of my body, you know. Yeah. But because you were going so rapidly, and I was like, you know, really trying to be focused, I was surprised at how, like, I lost track once, and I was like, wow, where did I go? And then I got back on, and yeah, I was surprised at how I was able to keep moving with you, mm-hmm. you know, so rapidly. Mm-hmm. And I think because it's the, you know, diaphragm breathing, you know, it felt fairly easy to stay down there, you know. But there's a difference between staying down there physically because I'm used to being able to, you know, and have my head go somewhere else at the same time as having my attention down here.
Right.
You know, so, you know, I at one time felt the separation, you know, like, oh yeah, okay, I'm doing that because I know how to do it and I can put my physical attention there, but I felt my mind drift up. But for the most part, it was fairly easy to keep down there. But I think because it was the diaphragm, which is kind of a regular point of focus, you know. But as he said, it, you know, keeping the focus down, definitely there was less chatter too.
Yeah, so I'm curious when you said, you know, and I do this practice often, and there are still times where I, you know, lose complete sections and then come back.
Yeah.
And then, you know, but you said something very interesting about, you know, so you were able to follow along, and then at some point when you lost it, you didn't know where you were.
Right.
And was it really a sense of just like you didn't know where your awareness was, or is there a sense that it was somewhere but just not where, you know, where it was supposed to be in terms of the exercise?
No, I felt a little lost. You know, like I wasn't thinking a particular thought. I just, at least I wasn't aware of it. I just all of a sudden thought, wow, you know, because it felt like I was on a train, you know, or kind of a little bit like, okay, do, and then, wow, where am I? And I didn't even know where you were, you know, and I had to, okay, we're at the, whatever it was, you know, knee, ankle, okay, I'm back on. So yeah, I did get a little lost.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah, and so I think, you know, you bring up a very excellent example of basically what happens to all of us all the time, in the sense of, you know, how it's actually very difficult to remain present and embodied with your experience. That, you know, as we go through life and we're doing certain activities, you know, we're engaged to a certain extent and we really feel present, we really feel focused, we're doing something, and then at some point we're just not there anymore. And then we realize, oh, I don't know what just happened, and then we, you know, and we bring our attention back. And so really noticing that sense of when there's not a clear awareness of where your attention is in relationship to your sensory experience, there can be this disconnect that happens, and we kind of momentarily lose that sense of presence. And so one way to think about this practice is we're remembering to be present. And the more we practice to remember, oh yeah, where am I right now? Where is my attention? What am I doing? What am I paying attention to? And that we can actually string those moments together in a, you know, in a continuous flow. That's why I kind of like when I do this practice or body scan practices. I've also done them, and often when they're taught pretty slow. And there's a benefit to that. There's a benefit to really spending time with each part of your body and finding deep relaxation and like getting into tension or things that we don't notice in those points. But as you say, there's a tendency to not be able to really stay there for a long period of time. But when things are actually moving pretty quick, it's easier to stay present with what's happening. And then slowly over time, you can maybe make it a little bit slower and see if you can still stay with it. And then when you get to the point where you know, you're drifting off more and more frequently, actually speeding it up a little bit, because that kind of consistency of movement will make it easier to be engaged. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
I'm wondering how this practice or technique might be used if while you are doing this and focusing in different parts of your body, you become very aware of pain or discomfort.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering whether there's a practical application to move away from that or work through it, or I mean, I did actually notice that something, which was this tension in my legs, and I was feeling pretty uncomfortable for a while, and then I just followed your prompts.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was aware that it was no longer a problem.
Mm.
But I mean, I'm just wondering if that has an application for discomfort.
Sure, yeah. So that's a very big question. And there's a lot that can be said. And I think one thing, that it's really great that you bring that up to notice is that actually we think sometimes, especially in this practice, that we want to like bring our attention to our bodies. And of course, feeling relaxation and feeling peacefulness is something that we want to cultivate, and over time will tend to be more of a natural quality. But in reality, there's a lot of pain and discomfort in our bodies. Both just the physical pains and discomfort that we acquire with injuries and old age, but also just the trauma of our lives is stored in our bodies. And very often the reason that we think so much and aren't in our bodies is because if we actually paid attention to our bodies, we'd start to feel that pain. And we don't want to feel that pain. And so the strategy of escaping that is to bring our attention somewhere else, into some thought, into some memory, moving away from that pain. And so one of the general outcomes of really working with the body for a prolonged period of time is that you start to actually give yourself permission to feel all of those things that are happening that we don't really want to feel, and that we resist. And that really only by going through those experiences and feeling them fully will they eventually get resolved. Now that being said, we want to do that in a very skillful way, and we don't want to overwhelm ourselves too quickly by facing really big challenges in the body that maybe we're not ready to face. So one thing that Shinzen talks often about is that with any kind of challenge that comes up in practice, there's generally two strategies: either turn towards or turn away. And both have their benefits and both have their applications. The turn towards is if you're feeling a sense of, kind of courage, of strength, and that, I kind of really want to face this and really want to see what's happening here. To actually put your attention into that experience. And it might be painful, it might be uncomfortable, whatever it is. And as we do that, it is important to keep our bodies still. That sense of not moving our bodies and really experiencing that sensation fully. Any kind of fidgeting or wiggling that we do with our bodies, sort of an unconscious tendency to take awareness away from what's actually happening. So that's why the stillness practice is emphasized, so much in meditative traditions. So to really bring our awareness into that experience and, to the best of our ability, completely allow ourselves to have that experience. Allow that experience to come, allow it to go, see how it changes over time, and actually get interested in, just what does this feel like? And when you really start to feel it at a really body, visceral level, and not, thinking about the stories of why it might be here and what it's connected to and all the things that are there, it's still going to be unpleasant. There's still a quality of it that you probably won't like. But it somehow becomes manageable, it somehow becomes interesting, that you can explore it a little bit. And as you're able to actually stay with that experience for long enough, and sometimes it could be a very short amount of time, sometimes we need to stay with things for longer periods of time, it does start to break up and dissolve. And then we actually can see and have the confidence with our own experience that, as uncomfortable as it might be, if we actually stay with this experience, at some point it does resolve itself. It does go away. Then on the other side, the turn away strategy is, it's just causing us too much suffering and too much pain that we're really able to handle at this moment. And we can have a sense for that. We're not trying to push ourselves too hard, take things in manageable steps. So if you happen to notice something that is a little bit difficult, is painful, is uncomfortable, one thing that you could do is just focus your attention somewhere else, which sounds kind of similar to what you did. I was instructing to pay attention to something other than that, and you followed me, and then you noticed that it went away because you weren't paying attention to it. So that can happen. Another strategy can be to turn away from it, but to almost put your awareness around it, to pay attention to the boundaries of where the pain or discomfort is, and then notice that there comes this point in space where it's no longer pain and discomfort. And right around it, there's a sense of spaciousness and a sense of relaxation. And you can almost hold that sense of spaciousness, and you're still feeling what's inside there, but you're not digging into it. You're holding the space around it. And that also gives it room to resolve itself in a little bit more of a gentle way. Great question.
Two questions. One, were you implying, and do you think that when we're thinking or having visual images and thoughts, that our attention is spatially located in our heads? Okay, so if that's the case, the last two major focus spaces that I've worked with in my practice have both been in my head, like my breath in my nostrils, and then the ringing that kind of begins inside of my head. And so I'm wondering, it seems like it would be a natural pitfall from what you said that I would start to have thoughts and get caught up in them because my attention is spatially located in my head. So I was wondering if you had any suggestions for working with a focus space like that that's also physically in your head.
Sure. So maybe I didn't make this entirely clear, so I'm glad you're clarifying it. That it's not necessarily the case that if your attention is in your head, you will be thinking. And it's also not necessarily the case that if your attention is somewhere else in the body, that you won't be having thoughts. It's possible to really have the experience of your attention being, anywhere in your body, and you're really staying there and you feel like you're low, but there's still thoughts that are happening in the background. But there's not the tendency to get as wrapped up and caught up in the thoughts if you're able to keep your awareness at a different location in the body. So I think a challenge that does arise from working spatially in the head is that when thoughts do come up, there probably is a little bit more of a tendency to get caught up in them. And so I know one general framework that Alan Wallace talks a lot about, who I've studied with and is a big inspiration in my practice, is he mentions that it's generally good to start in lower places in the body, especially if you're doing the mindfulness of breathing out the nostrils, until your mind has settled and calmed a little bit. And then once that has happened, bring the awareness up into the head and trying to maintain the vividness of your awareness without losing that sense of relaxation. But often if we're very caught up in thoughts and very distracted, to bring our awareness to the nostrils or to a space in the head can tend to be difficult to really let those thoughts go. But not impossible. You could stay in that area and figure out a way to work with it as well. So one suggestion could be is if you notice that it's hard to let go of thoughts, to maybe work somewhere lower in the body for a little bit until things settle, and then come back up into the space in the head and try to work with it there. But it definitely doesn't imply that if your awareness is in your head, it is the case that you definitely will be thinking.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Great, so let's do some more practice, and then we'll have time for more questions and reflection. And so once again, paying very close attention to your posture. So there was this very interesting teacher that I studied with in India, who was very adamant about posture and setting up. And what he would say all the time is, in a Malaysian accent that I won't even try to imitate, but that you have to set up or else you're going to be upset. And the more you start to pay attention to your posture, you'll really notice if you're able to maintain an upright and balanced posture with your body, where there's a sense of kind of presence and confidence, but also a sense of relaxation, and this practice just goes a lot easier. And that the more our bodies are out of alignment, there's this constant fidgeting and struggling to just try to find that sense of ease. And so everyone is different, and everyone's body needs different things. And so if you know what's right for your body, you can pay attention to that. But general principles, keeping the feet planted on the ground, feeling a sense of groundedness, pushing into the chair. And then from the hips, allowing your spine to lengthen, growing tall. And then keeping the spine tall, allowing the body to relax and settle in. One way I like to think about this is, it's like your spine is a coat rack. It's strong and stable, sturdy. But then your body is like a coat. It just drapes over that coat rack and allows gravity to pull it down towards the ground. And so finding that balance between length in the spine and then utter relaxation in the body. And so I won't go through the point-by-point body scan again. You just allow yourself to, in your own way, move your attention through different points in your body. Paying attention to parts of the body, paying attention to whole collections of parts of your body. And experiment. Allow yourself to be creative and see that you can use your intention to move your awareness through your body. Remember, I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't know if anyone ever used to watch the Magic School Bus. And it's like those things where they would shrink down and then go inside someone's body and then explore everything that's happening inside there. And so you can actually do that with your awareness. Allow yourself to explore the body. And then once again, bring your attention to your breathing. And there are certain practices where you allow your breath to be completely natural without modifying it. And those practices have their particular value. But for this practice, be willing to use a little bit of effort. Be willing to actually be engaged with your body. And the emphasis is going to be on the exhale. Just very softly and gently, exhaling a little bit deeper than you normally would if you were just letting the breath go on its own. Notice how at the very bottom of that exhale, your awareness settles into that point in the lower belly. And then when that exhale comes to the natural bottom, just let go and allow the inhale to come on its own. And feel a sense of energy and vitality filling the body. And then when you've reached the top of the natural inhale, exhaling and using a little bit of effort, using a little bit of intention. Exhale into the lower belly. And when you inhale, see if you can keep the awareness low. So even though the breath might be filling up and there are sensations in the chest and up in the nose, see if you can hold your awareness in the lower belly. Maybe even noticing that as you inhale and exhale, there's a very subtle expansion and contraction that happens at that point. The sense and that space getting a little bit bigger. And then it collapsing in upon itself. And so keeping your attention centered right in the lower belly, bringing a little bit of effort into your exhale. As you exhale down into that space. And then allowing your awareness to cover the space around your body. Allow your awareness to be a little bit more expansive. Noticing how from the perspective of that point in the lower belly, as you breathe, the whole body is very subtly expanding and contracting. Maybe even you feel a ripple effect of the breath that moves throughout the body. And it even moves throughout the space around your body. Letting all of that be in the background. Letting the center of your attention be at that single point inside the body, a couple inches below the belly button. And if you find that you're getting a little bit sleepy, this is relaxing, but maybe too relaxing, use a little bit of effort in your exhale. Really find that place where you can use enough effort that it starts to energize your body and wake yourself up. Or maybe perhaps you find that there's too much energy in your body. And use a little bit less effort in your breath. And focus on the relaxing quality of the release of the exhale. And so we use this practice to find that midpoint of balance between a drowsiness and a dullness in the mind and in the energy of the body. And then also an over-excitation. Always noticing, do we need a little bit more effort or a little bit less effort? And so just noticing that if you get lost, if you wander off, if you start grasping onto thoughts or images, you can ask, where are you? Where did you go? Where is your attention? And then use the power of your exhale to bring your attention low into the center of the body. And then developing the strength to hold the attention there. And just like building muscle, we need many repetitions of this. And so if we become lost, if our attention rises, and even if there's resistance in bringing our attention low into the body, that working through that resistance is what's going to strengthen that muscle. It's going to strengthen our ability to place our attention where we would like it at any given time. And then have the mindfulness to remember to keep it there. As you do this, also subtly becoming aware if there's any tension building up at any part of the body. And simply be aware of that tension and allow it to relax. And see what can you do to release that tension just a little bit. And keep the momentum of your breath, feeling that subtle expansion and contraction throughout the body. Releasing any tension that might be building. So checking in, where are you? What is it like to actually inhabit our bodies? To let go of our stories, our opinions, our need to understand, and simply be with this direct experience of our bodies. And noticing that we feel our bodies with our bodies. And it's not our mind that feels the body. The body somehow feels itself. As you stay with the body, see if you can explore that. What is it that's experiencing this? What is it that feels this? Without our story about it. And for the last few moments here, if you've been sticking with that conscious control of your exhale, using a little bit of effort, a little bit of force to breathe into the lower belly, see if you can now let go of that effort. And so as you use your effort to move the breath, now see if you can release that effort and allow whatever momentum you've cultivated to continue on its own. And so shifting your concentration from doing anything physically with the body to simply trying to hold your awareness, your attention, in the lower belly. Allowing this rhythm, this momentum of breath to continue. And from that perspective, feeling the body. And just noticing all that's happening. And for this body that we don't often pay attention to. And actually a lot can be happening once we start to look. And so be a curious observer. Allowing tensions to come and go. No matter what arises, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, being willing to stick with it, to not return to what's comfortable, back to our minds, thinking about this and that, but developing a new wisdom, staying with the body. And as you hear the sound of the bell, slowly opening your eyes, coming back into the room. As we move into another period of discussion, notice just because the bell rang, do we shift our attention? Do we shift where we are? How is it possible to be in conversation, to see each other, to see the room, and still be present in your body? So any questions or reports?
I tried to use the preventative approach that you talked about of starting with the awareness low before moving up. And I noticed a couple of things. One, just there was a real absence of thoughts and images that were like pulling me in the same way. There were still thoughts and images that came up, but they didn't goad me in the same way, and that was really pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I noticed that I don't really know, like you said, that Alan's advice is to start low in the body and then to move elsewhere, like to the nostrils, when you feel that the mind is settled. And I realized that I don't really have a marker or knowledge for when my mind might be settled. I was wondering what you thought about that.
I mean, there's no ultimate marker that anybody else can give you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be the judge of basically, do you feel like you're staying with the practice, or do you feel like you're just constantly distracted and lost?
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's the marker. If there's just this sense of, I'm just wasting my time here, nothing's happening, I'm just thinking about all this stuff, then maybe, okay, go a little bit lower for a little while until you get a sense of, just as you said, that stuff is still happening, but it's not pulling you as much.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a sense of really being caught up in it. And then once you have a sense of that, you can start to come back up, and if you can maintain that, then great. But then if you get back to that point where you feel like, you can't maintain it anymore, and then you can potentially shift. And you have to be the judge of that in terms of, what you feel is working for you in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it felt really stable, but like a conditional kind of stable, where if I were to move, it felt like if I were to go to a focus space that I was more familiar with, that it would not remain as
Mm-hmm.
stable. So I guess I chose to mostly stay low.
Yep.
But yeah, keep playing with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good observation. Yeah.
I think I'm glad that you said if there's tension in your body, then relax that. Because I had used this technique for you have been there. For getting my muscle paralyzers injected in the right side of my body. And I think it's just taken some time, but then I feel that if I relax, it goes so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you said. And kind of need that tension wherever it is, and then okay, I'll work with this now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really okay. I working with this now, working with this now, breaking it apart. So helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Thanks for that reminder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially, I find that as I do this practice more and more, that it can seem sometimes like doing this practice is actually creating tension in the body, and especially the sense of using this, intentional effort in the breath. And sometimes it is because we're kind of pushing too hard, and so that's feedback that we need to back off a little bit. But often it can also be that we're just starting to become aware of the tension that is just always present in our bodies, and that we're carrying around on a more subtle level, and not noticing it. So sometimes we can feel that when that tension is there, that something is wrong. It seems how somehow this practice is creating that tension. But it's important to notice that it could be the case that that tension was already there, and you're now just becoming aware of it. And since you're aware of it, you now have the opportunity to try to relax into it and resolve that tension while still kind of maintaining the technique. Something that this does when our mind starts to become concentrated, it also starts to be able to perceive more subtle aspects of things that are happening in the body. It's kind of like the ultimate technology of concentration. It's like, why do people talk about concentration so much in terms of meditation? And really what it boils down to is that the things that need to be resolved are subtle, and they're not within the scope of our current awareness. And the tool to be able to perceive those subtle things is a concentrated mind. And in some sense, that's just science. Mystics and the yogis, have developed that over thousands of years. And that science is very well defined and very well laid out.
So one thing to do is like a body scan. And as you're scanning, if you see tension or stuff, to maybe turn towards or turn away, as the case may be. And another thing you taught us was sort of centering below the navel and experiencing that kind of flow or whatever that experience might be. What about, so sometimes I just kind of put my mind to my body in general, without being specific about it. I just sort of, okay, body experience, like what's going on in there. And then I can feel also all sorts of different things kind of indiscriminately.
Yeah.
That there's just a lot going on. Is there a way that you suggest working with that stuff in a do nothing-ish way? I mean, what is a way to work with it? Is there a way in just a more general, goofy way?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think definitely so as we develop proficiency in this practice and we, develop a sense of concentration, a better perception of a more subtle awareness of what's happening in the body, it kind of becomes second nature. You just kind of say, all right, put your awareness in your body and you're feeling all this stuff. You're noticing all this stuff that's happening. And so I would say it is important to have a clarity on what is the kind of spatial location of your attention. And one way to consider that is, all right, so maybe you're covering the whole body. It's what Shinzen calls even coverage. So you're evenly covering the whole focus space. And so you're, allowing yourself to be aware of anything that's happening within any part of the body. And that can be very easy, but at least you have the knowledge that that's what you're doing, that there's the intention, I'm going to evenly cover throughout the whole body. And then if there's a sense that, there's a whole bunch of stuff just happening, then, holding that even coverage and giving space around your experience. And then just as you say, it's sort of then dropping into a do nothing mode. where you don't necessarily need to be intentionally working with the breath in any way. You actually don't even need to be aware of the breath at all. There's a lot of other interesting stuff that can be happening in the body. And then, the breath can just do its thing in the background. And then at that point, the challenge is equanimity. Can you simply allow whatever is happening right now to happen, and actually noticing how moment by moment there's just all of these things coming and going, and maintaining that equanimity, and then having that lead towards the insight that there's sensations constantly arising and passing in the body. So the general advice that I would give when I do that kind of practice is have a little bit of clarity on maintaining a sense of spaciousness and an even coverage of the body. That tends to help facilitate the letting go and allowing things to move on their own.
And so I kind of feel it's generally more torso-ish. So kind of also think, well, what's happening down the legs? But also trying to increase the coverage to kind of increase the idea of a whole coverage.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And so definitely increasing it and not, and so even if you expand it a little bit, it's kind of like, so the way that I like to think about it is that there's attention and there's awareness, right? And this is a little bit subtle, but essentially awareness is boundless. Awareness is the space of the universe. Awareness is everything that happens is happening in our awareness in some sense. But then our attention is a limited version of that awareness.
The emphasis.
Right, the emphasis. But it's the case that our attention could be centered in a certain place, but there's still an awareness of things that are happening outside of that area of attention. So you can kind of keep the attention where it naturally wants to be, but kind of in the background also notice how there are other things happening in a larger space of awareness. And just that simple noticing and that simple giving in to that space of awareness kind of allows the things that are happening in the more focused attention space to have a little bit more freedom.
Thank you.
Do you have a question still, Catherine?
And nobody else has a question. Otherwise, cool. I can always ask you later.
Okay.
I think that you're right about tension that was already there becoming more apparent once you start meditating, because I have this saying that happens only when I meditate on the right side of my back. It shows up. I don't know if it's just because of sitting up in a chair, I'm not used to that, and the muscle isn't like that. But it only happens when I meditate. But I do notice that, I catch myself sitting weird at a computer and not even noticing it until I bring some attention to it. And I never feel pain in those situations because I'm thinking and doing things. And this time when you said, if your tension in your body, relax it, I remember from last time I was here a couple of weeks ago when Daniel was here, I noticed that when I said labeled something as happening, it went away. So I was trying that with the tension. And it was actually really effective. It would break it up. It would be, I think I was breathing in and saying happening, and then as I breathed out, I would kind of breathe into that area that had tension, and it would go away while I was breathing out, and then I'd breathe in again. It would be there, but slightly different, slightly less, maybe in a different place, and it would keep doing that, and that was breaking it up. So sort of interesting to see that happening.
Yeah. And so you were using that strategy too of using that happening label on it. Yeah. And so that's an excellent example to say that, there are, I don't know, thousands of meditation techniques. It's just really ridiculous now that, one of the great advantages of being sort of in a technological age is that just the wisdom of traditions are just now available to us. And especially in Shinzen system, there's very much this idea of there's a lot of different things that you can do, and we're going to learn how to strategize and figure out the best thing that works. So any strategies that you've picked up along the way, different techniques that you've integrated and you really have learned have worked for you, you can use that to experiment with different ways to deal with things. The one point that maybe I'm trying to emphasize today that you can kind of add as another tool in all of this is to really notice how it's one thing to label something, and then it's another thing to actually have your attention be where it is, in a spatial sense. And so it's great to add the label and to add the other things, but in addition to that, make sure that your attention is actually on that thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I really liked having the attention low and sort of a rooted sort of way, and I found that I felt the sort of trust and confidence that came out of just feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Yeah. Welcome.
I have a question about the spatial sense. When I go through the body, let's say it's the left knee, there's always this perspective, right? As a knee, and then I see it from here, where my eyes usually are, and I can't just zoom in and have a different perspective. I don't have the information, the experience, and so it makes me kind of be a little bit unease, because it's I'm still in my head, because I'm looking down, even though the attention is there.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, that goes away, that perspective, but then there's nothing there. There's no boundary of the knee, right? It's just, without a space, it looks confusing, but it feels a valuable situation, I can go back to the perspective very quickly, but just staying there with the knee. And then I don't think it's so much a spacious, awareness anymore. It's the knee, right? I mean, if there's pain, I definitely know that's what I'm connected with right now, but it's not anymore this thing that's over here, right? There's maybe some vague sense of spaciousness, but I couldn't even say that I'm inside the knee. I couldn't say that either. Right? It's more like, so I think that's my question is, I think it's a good space to be in, as opposed to having a spatial, very clear definition of where I am, like a view.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're demonstrating the point that I'm trying to bring up.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring up a very good point that we didn't talk about yet, is this sense of the mental images that arise in relationship to where you're placing your attention in the body. And so one thing to, and maybe other people have noticed this also when we were doing this exercise, is that it's very common to, as we bring our attention somewhere in the body, to immediately have this mental picture of that thing. And just as you say, it can sometimes feel like you're up here, almost like projecting the image down where the space is. And that's natural, and we're all doing that all the time. And it has its use. There's a usefulness to that. There's not a necessity to, that needs to be gotten rid of. The important point is that to notice the more subtle aspect of it. Okay, so there's this mental image of my knee, let's say. And then paying attention, okay, so I notice there's a mental image of my knee, but am I actually feeling my knee right now and also noticing that mental image? Or am I just noticing the mental image and not really feeling my knee? That's the first distinction that you need to make. So it's okay for the mental image to be there, and the mental image is sort of like, it points at an experience. So you can use the mental image to point you at an experience, but then have that experience. And notice if you're not just having the mental image. Then, exactly as you said, there's this natural progression of, then once you do that and you stay with that experience, at some point that mental image does fall away. And we learn how to have direct perception of, of felt sensation in the body. And in a very surprising way, when that happens, our experience of what we think our body is and where we are in space is radically different. You can't even say anymore that there's even a knee there, but like somehow there's still the knowledge that you are feeling your knee, but the experience of it is totally different. And so that can be a little bit disorienting and a little bit interesting, a little bit confusing, but to know that actually that experience is pointing towards something that on a more foundational level is a little bit more accurate to what the experience of sensation actually is, rather than constantly needing to project this mental image or concept onto the sensation. And so with time, we just get familiar with kind of navigating in that space and working with sensations directly without the need to add on the images on top of it.
It's almost like a composite experience, right? Where right now with my eyes open, it's even more intense in color, of course, right? And it's all this experience of the knee, right? And then if the other things kind of fall away, there's maybe this more direct one, which maybe more like the tactile nerves more than the visual thing. But I also think that corrective stuff arises as needed, as it's useful. So my heart aches, right? Suddenly I have like an idea of where my heart is. And so, but it's different, right? From the mind basically simulating reality and almost like intentionally projecting, visualizing something to focus, where something kind of arises because it's just useful and it does make sense to have an image to get over the pain because it's helpful for me to, do something wrong.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and maybe one more point to bring up since you're talking about that is, and I mentioned it briefly in the guidance, is that so in many different like mystical philosophical systems in talking about our consciousness, it's often said that there are 6 separate qualities of consciousness, and that whether these are actually completely separate things or different aspects of the same thing, there's debate from a lot of different systems. But either way, it's said that, there's our 5 senses, so what we smell, hear, taste, touch, feel, right? And that each one of those senses actually has its own consciousness that perceives that sense. And then there's mental consciousness. And mental consciousness has its, the mind, thoughts and images, all that kind of stuff. It has its own consciousness that perceives that stuff. So we start to notice that actually that when we are able to feel the body without the mental consciousness also being there with the thoughts and the images, that we have the sense that we almost need these thoughts and images to like have any experience at all. But then we start to see that it's possible to have an experience without that. And so what's happening at that time is that consciousness, whatever, if it's feeling, is having that experience, directly within the mode of that sense conscious, which is kind of very different than what happens normally, where all of these consciousnesses are tangled up together. And they're so kind of like moment by moment operating very quickly. And so the world that we perceive kind of comes together and it seems like there's just this one awareness that's aware of all of this stuff. But as we start to kind of untangle the strands and develop our concentration to stick with only one of them, we start to see that each of them operates in its own quality. That there's a different quality to each one of them, and we can potentially isolate them from each other, and then the experience of things shifts.
Oh.
What was disconcerting to me and a little distracting was a lack of awareness and sensation, my hands.
Mm-hmm.
So I became kind of like interested in finding out why I'm not feeling my hands. What position are they in? That became a little mind distracting.
Yeah. Yeah, so one useful thing in Shinzen's system is he introduced a quality of, so every sense experience has a restful state and an active state, right? So what you're describing is a restful state in the sensations in your hand, for instance. But so one question that I could ask you is, how did you know that you weren't feeling your hands?
Because I put my attention, I think, on my lower arms and didn't feel beyond that.
Mm-hmm. And so in some sense, yeah, so you didn't feel beyond that, but it's in a very strange way, the absence of feeling is an experience that you can have, and you feel that experience, right? It's simply you're feeling the absence of a feeling, but you still actually, if you pay attention, you do feel that experience.
Okay.
And so that's okay. That's the experience that you're feeling. And when you can frame it in that way, then it doesn't become this sense of, oh, I think that this should be different.
Mm-hmm.
You simply allow it to be what it is, and just as you say, kind of get curious and interested about, why aren't I feeling anything in my hands? But really explore that feeling directly with feeling the experience of not feeling your hands, instead of trying to think about, I wonder why I'm not feeling my hands, right?
Yeah.
And then it might stay that way, and that might lead to something interesting. Or as you stay with it, then you might start to feel something there. And that's interesting too.
I was just thinking about what you were saying about the separate consciousnesses of your sensory and thought processes. Do you think it's possible to listen to someone speaking? Like, I was listening to you speaking and thinking, I wonder if I could ever listen to you speaking, but not be taking in the meaning of the words. Because like that's like one of those like top-down processes that we're just using all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely possible.
It happens to me all the time.
But like, I feel like then you're like lost in your thoughts, right? Like, it's like when I hear someone talking and I don't get it, I like repeat, repeat that. It's like, it's because I'm like lost in my thoughts.
Yes and no.
Yeah, I mean, so one tangible example, right, that I think everyone can relate to on a pretty easy level is that if you're in a crowded place where a lot of people are having conversations, right, you can be having a conversation with the person that you're with, right,
Yeah.
and you're hearing all the other conversations that are happening around the room. Like, you're actually hearing those conversations, but your attention is on the person that you're talking to, so you're not actually comprehending any of those sounds that you're hearing, right? You've had that experience before. So that at least proves to us that it's possible to do. Now, whether you can do that and actually be paying attention to the person who's speaking, it is possible to do that, but extremely challenging. Suri was even recently, he was talking to us about this, that, so you can take, if you can take a waveform of human speech, right? And at some point, maybe correct me, Michael, if I'm getting this wrong a little bit, but you can, either slow it down and speed it up. And there comes like a critical point where if you slow it down to a certain amount, or if you speed it up to a certain amount, you're hearing it, but you can no longer make out what the person is saying. And if you just move it back, a little bit in either direction, then you can actually perceive what they're saying. So that kind of like shows an analogy of, if you're so present with the like moment by moment changing of sound in someone's voice, and you're so curious about that there's no room in your awareness to also be curious about the meaning, then it's possible to kind of, you're so focused on that sound at it's almost like time slows down in your perception, It's like time slows down so much, and you're hearing every little change in the sound of whatever it is, that it reaches that critical point where you can no longer comprehend what it means anymore. And so, if that's something that you're curious about, I would suggest experimenting. Give it a try.
Actually, I was trying to experiment there. I was watching your lips move for a while. And then all I saw was lips. But anyway. Yeah, I found that interesting what you were talking about, the different kind, I've never heard that before, different consciousness. The experience I have frequently, which I had today, because I guess I was tired. I'm not tired any longer though, but really tired. I feel like I have like a luminous cloud in my head, and it's like a cloud, and all I hear is like people talking, like people would talk in another room, and that's sort of whatever's going on in my head is like people talking quietly in another room, and you're just hearing that, and there's just this cloud, and then what's interesting is, so I kept trying to do the exercise, going into my body. I was having a hard time doing the exercise, and this thing was just there. But what's interesting about it is that even though I'm totally unable to do the exercise, there's something happening anyway. And all of a sudden, like the cloud shifts out, and there's this clear space. I mean, even though I was basically pretty much unable to, I was present in my body, but I wasn't able to do it in the way that I was trying to. But then the last thing that happens is there's this sound, and that was the thing that I was going to ask you about, that happens, and it always happens when I get deeper into meditation, and it's really loud. And I was wondering if a lot of people get this, or is it just some weird quirk? It's like twilight sound, and it gets louder and louder. It's a very comforting sound. It's not a nasty sound, but it gets louder and louder, and it's like I could hear it right now as I'm talking to you. And it always happens when I get into a certain kind of a space. So, any thoughts on it? Awesome.
Yeah.
I could give you an answer to that question, but it would not be from my direct experience. But I think Michael might be able to say something of value about that.
And Sam could too. Sam has also worked with this. It's my main technique right now is listening to that sound. It's called tinnitus in Western medicine, and it sounds like it's very common that as you become more concentrated, that sound becomes more prominent, and often can get really loud. And so you could try just listening to that sound as your focus space once it becomes more prominent. And recently, that's why I asked Danny about the spatial stuff earlier, is because Sorry has been having me pay attention to where I hear the sound. Pay attention to its spatial aspect, and it seems to start in my head, but maybe appearing elsewhere.
It's always over there.
Oh. Great, so pay attention to that. And I learned about this practice from a teacher named Edward Slim Michael, and his books are great, and I really recommend them. I'd be happy to write it down for you or anyone else later.
But do you find it annoying? Because I find it pleasant and comforting.
Yeah, I mean, this is more speculation, but I know a lot of people, especially when it's called tinnitus, associate it with like it being really unpleasant, really aggravating. I've heard of, a friend of mine told me about someone leaving a center that he practiced at because it got so loud and obnoxious. This is, again, just speculation because it would require two people's direct experience, but I think that it may have to do with like equanimity. That if you have a fair amount of equanimity, then the sound won't appear unpleasant. But that if you have a lot of lack of equanimity, it appears more unpleasant. So I would suggest if you do experience it as unpleasant, like really listening to it and trying to relax your body and see if that changes it at all. I experience it as a pleasant, and also another quality that's worth paying attention to is how it really doesn't sound like any other sound. You called it twilight. I like that. It's really not like any other sound for a couple of reasons, but
Yeah, it's kind of a pulsating sort of
Mhm.
twilighty sound.
Yeah, so keep working with it. That's great.
Mine is more like crickets.
There's a spectrum of, of that also for people, There's so many different experiences, because I know somebody who, it is aggravating because it's present for her 24 hours a day, but when she meditates, it kind of becomes less prominent, the opposite of, it kind of fades away as she focuses on, a different focus space, so.
So time is winding down. So we had a lot of discussion this evening. I hope that it was enjoyable and interesting, and that also the practices that were useful. And so maybe I'll just kind of give a little summary and takeaway. And the summary is, we have bodies. And the more often that you remember that, the more often you can learn to be more present in your life in a way that doesn't seem to be as filtered through the lens of our stories and the way that we see things conceptually. That actually, especially as you were talking about, there's this sense of clarity that happens. And when we can be grounded and centered in the body, there's this mysterious quality of our attention that is clear. And we're aware of what's happening, we can interact, we can talk, we can do things that we're doing, and we can do it without thinking about it. We can just kind of trust that our bodies know how to do this thing. And one of the reasons that everybody knows this is true and why a lot of people enjoy different sports that really kind of push us now. I mean, maybe you haven't gotten out too much this winter, but something like skiing or snowboarding, where it's kind of, you're moving really fast and you really need to be in your body and you need to move quickly. It's like, there's just not time to think. You just have to trust your body and let it do its thing. And so the question is, what if you could live your life like that? What if you could live your life being present in your body and trusting that your body has a wisdom that knows what to do, and we don't need to understand it or think about it all that much. And so the way that we do that is practice. And the kind of tangible way in our experience that we can know if we're doing it or not is paying attention to spatially, where is our attention? And notice if you can spatially place your attention somewhere lower in your body. And as you said too, we feel grounded. And actually, mysteriously, with a sense of feeling grounded, we feel confident. It's almost as like, I can do this. And that confidence comes, yes, from a sense of being grounded, but that groundedness is a lack of the thoughts, I'm not confident right now. And so that's interesting to pay attention to as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great questions and great comments.
Do we have one? Let's go with
Yep.
it then.
And